The Toyah Bluff site, 41TV441, an extensive late prehistoric occupation site spanning the transition period between the Austin and Toyah intervals in Central Texas prehistory, AD 1235 to 1425. Couple of things, housekeeping things up front, couple of disclaimers. We excavated the site over 20 years ago, and I took slides at the time and converted them to slides, and since converted a lot of these back to digital images that we can use. And some of these slides were clearly taken over 20 years ago. So I'd like to have a disclaimer in advance that some of the slides are exactly what you don't want to do when you're working on an archaeological site. But you'll see that here in just a moment. The other disclaimer is that it being 20 years ago, I haven't done anything with this research since that point. So I'm not up on what would be the latest developments in the transition period between the Austin interval and the Toyah intervals, or the latest thinking and method and theory and so forth. So I'm not trying to integrate those results with this. This is the state of the research as it was in the late 90s and early 2000s. So that said, we'll begin. Here is our project location in Travis County, Southeast Metropolitan Park. Nick mentioned to me that, this is Travis, it's TCAS, and maybe y'all have been discussing Travis, the Southeast Metropolitan Park lately, but in advance of the park construction, we did survey testing and data recovery. Here's the Southeast Park, here's Onion Creek, and it's on a bluff, more or less the Toyah Bluff site overlooking Onion Creek to the north. The actual excavations were here, kind of the side. This is SH 71 here at the bottom. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to just throw them out there. Here is a map of the investigations, survey testing, and data recovery. We did quite a lot of work. Shovel tests in red and trenches, a lot of backhoe trenches, a lot of shovel tests. We finally decided on the placement for two broad block excavations. Here, blocks 1 and block 2. Here is the house that you'll see in some of the slides. Road, fence line. Here's an ephemeral drainage that accounts for some of the deposition at the site. It allowed for some minor deposition that resulted in good preservation in the shallow deposits at the site. And the bluff edge is to the north, overlooking Onion Creek. It began on a fine, foggy morn there on the terrace with, you can see all the shovel test holes that we initiated. And to me, part of the enthusiasm and the excitement of going back and doing this talk is who were the people that were out there. Some of the people that were involved in this from 20 years ago, it's good to think about who they were. Right here in front, that would be Rachel Fite. I can tell from her red hair all the way from here. And Christine Gauger, also with her red hair here in the background. I want to say that this is Jonathan Jarvis, but I'm not certain if that's him or not. And who's the guy in the hat here? Going back a bit, I think some of the people in this audience may have some things to say about the latest Austin and Toyah developments, and might remember who some of these people are. I want to say Huddler, but I'm not sure. I didn't check the credits as to who was actually doing the work there, but here's some of the crew from over 20 years ago. The shovel testing was arduous, and it was a tough job, and not everybody made it. Here we have a person who didn't quite finish, and we didn't know what to do with him, so we ended up stuffing him in a hole, and you can see he's kind of sticking up here on top, and his shoes are kind of sticking out the bottom over here where his feet are. I mentioned to the guy, I told him, don't piss Rachel off. If you do that, you just might end, butt up in a hole somewhere. And sure enough, he didn't listen, but he's probably still out there somewhere. Here we are in block 1, level 1. You can see the block we put in and the level nature of the terrace. I know you've all seen burnt rocks before, but kind of an overview from a distance type photograph of block 1, wonderful place to excavate. Block 1, level 2, and we're beginning to see the emergence of burned rocks of various types, which we made every attempt to pedestal. A slow but rising density of burned rocks. The stratigraphy is such that we had a plow zone, shallow plow zone, then a anthropogenic culturally modified zone for about 30 centimeters, overlying Beaumont Pleistocene clay. So there's a clear cultural zone when you started to get into it, below the plow zone and above the Pleistocene clay, and it was facilitated by the presence of a perched water table from the nearby drainage. The small drainage would flood, and there was a shallow accumulation of Holocene age sediments, and it led to a perched water table, which was excellent for preservation at the site. More of the investigations in progress. Here's Christine Gauger. I'm not sure who the person is here in the middle. Who is the guy in the cowboy hat? Who is the person in the cowboy hat? Nick, weren't you on those investigations? Didn't you help dig some of that?
No, I don't think so.
No? Kind of want to say this is you in the floppy hat here, but I seem to remember you working in a floppy hat, but maybe not.
I came out and worked with you on a site out by Hamilton Pool Road, which was
okay.
Previous to this.
That's another very long story. Anyway, crew in action with the backhoe nearby. Okay, now what's wrong with this picture?
Shadow.
Well, one of your goals as an archaeologist is to not get your fat head into the pictures. And lo and behold, I managed to get my fat head into the picture in the shadow on the right-hand side. So this is an example of a 20-year slide and what not to do at the archaeological site. Block 1, level 2, we see an increasing density of fire-cracked rocks, burned rocks in the investigations. At the bottom of level 2, we begin to discern features and label such. In this corner, we identified feature 3, which was sort of an L-shaped accumulation of large and small burned rocks, fire-cracked rocks. Here in the center, we have another cluster that we call feature 4, made of various types of fire-cracked rocks. Here is feature 3, kind of an L-shaped accumulation of different types of rocks. But in these features, we have large limestone clasts, sort of the bottom rocks. We have a lot of quartzite, a lot of fractured quartzite. Those are the two main types. And we tend to see large tabular rounded limestone rocks function as the bottoms or the rock beds of pit ovens, and the quartzite as more as lid rock type purpose. Here is feature 4, another sort of L-shaped accumulation of various sized rocks. You can see the limestone in whitish, and then some of the darker rocks are fractured quartzite. Feature 4, as it emerged in block 1, and kind of an overview shot at the top of level 3. We're quickly getting into a very dense occupation of archaeological remains, with feature 3 here in the foreground and feature 4 in the center ground, and a pretty dense scatter of materials. At the bottom of block 3, you can see the things I've already mentioned. Feature 3, feature 4. Over here, something else is emerging in this corner at the north end of the block that seems to have a lot of patterning and a lot of substance to it. Here's a plan view of through level 3. Here is feature 3 in block 1. Note on this schematic that we have, if you can see this, we have different types of rock. We have limestone as sort of a polygon, and quartzite is a dark filled in polygon, and red ochre, or not red ochre, but ochre as a hashed line, indicating that feature 3 in particular was primarily consisted of highly fractured small quartzite rocks. Stain, feature 4, kind of a mix of things, some larger limestone clasts, some highly fractured quartzite rocks as well, another stain, and a scattered occupation zone over the rest of the block. Level 4, here is the patterned arrangement of all sorts of rocks, and it begins to emerge in the north corner. Level 4 top, with remains of feature 4 here at the bottom. And this is a close-up shot of what would become feature 2. Note the density of rocks, note they're tightly packed together, note the composition of the rocks, and that we have sort of a mix of large limestone clasts, rounded, a little fractured, but not too broken, with numerous small, highly fractured quartzite rocks, and kind of a unique sort of or distinct patterning there at the north side of the block. Oh my gosh, what happened here? Here's yet another example of what not to do at the archaeological site. Completely washed out chalkboard. And I threw that in there actually for a reason beyond the question mark, which is, this is a good picture of the pit that is feature 2. That was feature 2. Notice the stain, the dark black anthropogenic stain associated with feature 2. And one of the things I remember about this site quite clearly is whenever you left for the day, you couldn't get the dirt off you. It was so greasy and so organic rich and so black, it would just stick to you and you could wash and wash and wash, but you could never get this stuff off your hands. And so that we can move forward, here is a picture of feature 2 in all of its splendor and glory at the site. Here's the accumulation of what I would say are lid rock or rake out pile with handy limestone and chert clasts on either side. Here's the basin pit. Note the larger rocks in situ at the bottom of the pit with some scattered chert, the depth of the pit. And this piece right here is a piece of ochre. There was a lot of ochre at the site. This really gives you a feel for the depth of the pit and the basin rock pile in the bottom of the pit. And then this associated possible rake out pile on one side. This is just a quick shot of feature 2 to show you the ochre. A lot of ochre in these investigations, and this is a huge piece right here. It's not red per se, but more of a yellowish type ochre that was found in situ within the feature. In plan view, here's the piece of ochre. Our rock bed and rock pit. Again, we made every effort to discern between the different types of rocks, so you can see that most of the rocks in the bed of the earth oven were limestone, mostly rounded, and in a tight accumulation, whereas there's a lot more quartzite rocks at higher elevations in this pile of rocks that are on the side, and all part of the feature 2 pit feature. Another rock pit in block 1 at this elevation was feature 11. This you can see with the upper portions of it removed, you can see it has a basin pit. It has clearly a stain associated with it. It has large limestone clasts in the center of the pit in the rock bed. It has ochre, and we have removed smaller rocks, quartzite rocks from around it. So it's similar characteristics between the 2 pit ovens here in block 1 and the bottom of level 4 in the investigations. In plan view, again, I point out the different types of rocks, the quartzite versus the larger limestone clasts, and the discrete arrangements. This is with most everything that was pedestaled and removed, leaving the 2 pit features. And here adjacent to feature 11, you can see scattered quartzite rocks overlying and next to the lower arrangement of the limestone in the block. Block 2, on another position of the terrace, begins. Here was a smaller block. We didn't actually excavate all of block 1. We excavated most of it. I had Steve Black come out to the site and sort of evaluate. He was on my committee at the time, what we were doing out there in block 2, and he recommended that we didn't have enough time and money to get to all of it, so take a portion of it, which is how we ended up digging out parts of it and not all of it. There was some pretty good advice on his part. Here's block 2. We quickly became committed in block 2 to some significant burn rock accumulations and pattern arrangements of rocks here in this Austin or Toyah AD 1235 to AD 1435 group of occupations that occurred there on the terrace. Of note are these large limestone rocks here that, with some cleaning up, we labeled as feature 12. There's a feature 9 and a feature 12 here in the center of the investigations. It's hard to tell from this slide. It'd be a little more clear, not necessarily in this one, but in this pattern arrangements of rocks right here, large limestone clast, we had what we called the kitchen Midden complex, feature 9, feature 12, kitchen Midden complex. Part of it is under the chalkboard here, and here's the rest of it. And we have what turns out to be a number of rake out or discard piles based on the composition of the rocks, based on the numbers of quartzite, highly fractured quartzite rocks, 2 limestone rocks. These appear to be rake out or discard piles, and we have this oven complex here, is what we called it, with feature 9 and feature 12 here, with the basin arrangements of larger limestone clasts, and all around it we have these other features, these other discrete accumulations that have different compositions of burned rocks, sort of a linear alignment of larger rocks. Another possible rake out pile here, rake out pile here. We have this dense bed arrangement and surrounded literally by numerous piles that are very close proximity to it that we associated with the use of this feature, and then others further off within the block. Some cleaner pictures of it from the manuscript. Feature 9, 12, kitchen Midden complex, with 9 in the south and 12 slightly to the north, large rounded clast that would have functioned as the bottom of pit ovens for the baking primarily, or all-purpose processing quite probably, but one function was the processing of plant foods, which is a unique aspect to a site that is transitional between the Austin interval with Scallern points and the Perdice interval with Perdice points, the Toyah interval with Perdice points. Profile view, features 9 and 12. You can see the basin and the stains and the rock beds of these larger rocks dug in to be the bedrock, the bottom layer of these pit ovens, basin pits, and the Pleistocene underlying clays. In plan view, feature 9, feature 12, again, large limestone rounded clasts comprise the pit ovens and the basins, in contrast to the adjacent piles that seem associated in physical, at least in close physical proximity to these, consisting of the chert of the quartzite, highly fractured quartzite rocks primarily, and in jumbled more or smaller rocks. They're in more jumbled patterning, highly fractured, as opposed to these central pit oven features. And we call this whole thing the F9-12 complex, with other possible lid rock and rake out piles very close. One deep filled rock pit, very highly stained area, went into the stain and found rocks at the bed of this, and throughout the whole matrix was a rock filled pit. So the artifacts. Slide's not all that great, but these are the Perdice points, some of them from the site. I want to try to provide a picture of the Perdice points. They're classic Perdice arrow points. And we had somebody very talented as an artist who drew these Perdice point sketches. One of the bottoms not, one of the bottoms unclassified, but the others are Perdice points. We have a number of blade-like flake tools, modified blades. The lithic assemblage included all the bells and whistles of a typical Toyah lithic assemblage. Blade-like flake tools, modified blades, Perdiz points, beveled knives. I don't think I put a picture of the beveled knives here, but there's a few of those. And it's a highly diverse assemblage, whereas many Austin phase documented assemblages are not diverse. They're basic and have a few tool types. And Toyah lithic assemblages have a number of different tool types. There's unifaces, there were scrapers, there's bifaces. Very diverse toolkit with a lot of blades in it. I found this one particularly interesting. This was a piece of ochre with a braiding grooves in it, clearly marked, or so we postulated here on one side. Austin phase scalern projectiles or scalern-like projectiles. We had a few. We didn't have too many of these. We just had a few. I think there were two that we categorized clearly as Austin, as scalern arrows. And this one's probably a miscellaneous and a scalern-like arrow here. Interestingly, all the scalern type points were found in block 2, and none were found in block 1. So the assemblage overall has the characteristics of a Toyah lithic assemblage at the time, more so than an Austin phase scalern occupation. But the radiocarbon ages are typically early for what would be considered a Toyah occupation, especially at that time. Here's some nice drawings of scalern-like points and Perdiz points. Freeform. This is a dart, miscellaneous dart. There was one dart. I should point with the pointer. There's one dart in here, miscellaneous dart. We didn't try to do much with that. And scalern-like or scalern arrows from block 2. Radiocarbon ages can be summarized as we've stated, as 1225, I think it is, to 1435 AD, 2 sigma calibrated radiocarbon ages. And we have one here from feature 2, near feature 2. That's a erroneous date. Feature 2, just some scattered charcoal that we thought was in good context from other pages in the block. Just feature 15, feature 11, and so forth for the dates that we do have that indicate that range. Macrobotanical finds, number of charred onions from feature context and generally scattered about the block. Bulb fragments, whole bulbs, charred bulbs, identified as lily onion bulbs. And from all the lessons I've been taught by Dr. Phil Daring, he says that if you just find 1 or 2, or if you find a few bulbs, charred bulbs in the immediate deposit surrounding features or in features, it's the indication that there were originally a lot more onion bulbs that were there, that were used, or part of the rakeout piles and scattered about. And I have a feeling that Leslie Bush might have something to say about that here, being in the audience. But note the number of charred onion bulbs in a Toyah lithic assemblage type site on the terrace. So, what do we have here? as of 20 years ago. Austin interval groups using earth ovens adopting the Toyah bison hunting toolkit. Do we have the adoption of the Toyah techno complex as it spreads across Texas? Did Toyah interval groups, were there Toyah interval groups using earth ovens from 1235 to 1435 AD? Or were there groups using a blade-oriented and highly diverse lithic assemblage during characteristically pre-Toyah times? Is it a specialized function Toyah site with earth ovens, plant foods, and onion bulbs? A specialized Toyah site in the Toyah rounds? That was virtually unheard of 20 years ago. Are the Toyah materials overprinted onto a series of Austin interval features through several hundred years, the thin veneer hypothesis? So those are the possibilities. We favor that there was a group of people living and working seasonally in a seasonal round on the terrace who were using earth ovens and processing plant foods, and that through time they gradually adopted the Toyah techno-complex in response to the increased availability of bison and bison hunting. So adopting the Toyah toolkit through the couple hundred years. A group of people adopting a different technology as opposed to some of these other possibilities. So I don't necessarily see it. It could be either way from the data that we have, and they could use some additional analysis, but I don't see it necessarily as a specialized Toyah site with earth ovens and plant foods, but more of a group of people who are adapting to changes in their surrounding environment. I don't see it as Toyah materials overprinted onto a series of Austin interval features. It's just the whole assemblage is nearly Toyah, and it's deep, and the entire 30 centimeters or so of occupation is full of Toyah artifacts, and there's excellent context and organics and well-preserved context. And I don't necessarily identify them as Austin interval groups either, but as a group of people who were there adapting to their conditions. There was bison bone found on the site, a few pieces, not a lot, and they were small pieces. There was deer bone, and there were also some crude ceramics, and the ceramics were basic utilitarian type ware. I didn't put any photographs of those in here. We separated the ceramics into a couple of different groups. We didn't have very many shards. I think there's maybe 15 approximately. And they were bone tempered, characteristic like Toyah sites. We separated out actually two different types of bone tempered ware. One was sort of just basic utility wear with basic bone tempering, and another had bone tempering similar to what has been observed along the coast. It had similarities to some of the bone tempered pottery that was found near the coastline, and then a few miscellaneous pieces. So the small ceramic assemblage would indicate a Toyah type occupation. And there was also some areas of highly fractured, highly processed, splintered and fragmented bone that has not been tabulated here for the presentation. Again, characteristic of a Toyah type occupation. So I'll leave it kind of at that. And as to your own interpretations, I heard in a talk a couple days ago that in 2012, that that Pergola and had characterized, I forget her name now, the famous archaeologist, had characterized later Toyah occupations as aggregated versus classic Toyah occupations. This was in 2012. With classic Toyah occupations being small rounds by small groups, small seasonal rounds by small groups, and in the later history of Toyah times, coming together as aggregate Toyah sites with hundreds and hundreds of people using a blade oriented and pretty arrow point oriented lithic assemblage with unifaces and beveled blades and all of the typical things you find with Toyah type assemblages. So this is the point we reached back then in the early 2000s. And I'm not real clear on how well this fits into the modern method and theory of today, but this is where we left it. And at the time it was, and I think still is, an excellent site with excellent preservation and worth talking about. So that's all I have for the moment, but I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
What's the connection with, or can you talk about the connection, if any, with the Smith rock shelter over at McKinney Falls? Both on Onion Creek?
I really can't. Do you have can you characterize what the assemblage was like there? Perhaps?
No, I don't. That's why I'm asking if, yeah, no, I can't. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between the two.
Well, I'm just not brief at the moment on what was at McKinney Falls, or I could perhaps address similarities or differences between them, but wish I could help.
Yep. And what about the ochre? Any idea where the ochre is coming from, or?
Don't have an idea where it's coming from, but it was prolific at the site, and there was huge pieces, and they were in every feature. Small pieces, big pieces, thick chunking pieces, flat tabular pieces. The one had abrasions on it. I don't think it's natural to that terrace. I don't know if it's natural to the Onion Creek channel deposits or any such, but they were bringing it in, and it had an important role of some sort. It was in every feature, practically, of all different shapes and sizes. I've never seen a site with so much ochre in it, actually, especially big pieces. And it wasn't red. It was more of a yellowish type ochre. Big slabs.
James? I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I noticed in your key that you had a symbol for clay. Did you find any little? Were you finding globs of clay or clay like balls or anything like that?
In the features, there was a lot of clay, a lot of baked clay. Feature 4, I guess I didn't mention it, but the two sort of block-like rocks in the center of that L-shaped formation were clay. And there were numerous areas of baked clay, just kind of amorphous patches, and other sort of more formalized groups, denser accumulations of burned earth and clay. So yes, and it was, I didn't mention that, but it was frequent in the deposits.
And also, to what extent were the people utilizing mussels from Onion Creek?
There were mussel shells. Typical of the other types of subsistence remains, not a lot. a few mussels, a small group of mussel shells in situ, in association with the hearth features, with the earth ovens and associated rake out pile. So yes, on the mussel content, presumably from the nearby creek.
Mhm. And also, I'm wondering a couple more things. Were there was there only the late prehistoric present at on that location? Were there any older deposits anywhere?
No older deposits. The 30 centimeter or so cultural zone contains exclusively late prehistoric deposits. There was one dart, probably carried in,
Right.
miscellaneous dart point. And I was thinking just the other day, actually, I gave a talk at the SAAs a couple days ago about a site upriver on Onion Creek, and it's early archaic, 8,000 BP, 6,800 BC with some recalibrated radiocarbon dates, not too far away, just up the creek, actually. So they were older occupations in the area, certainly, such as the one I just mentioned, but nothing on that terrace. It was all late prehistoric.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And is is that area now part of a soccer field or anything like that, or is it um, was it preserved?
Boy, that's a good question. I didn't go back and research what the county did actually with that. Presumably, I would have roped the area off for, stay out of here for future generations. That would be my typical approach to that. But
Yeah.
in the literature and so forth, I didn't. I in the CRM report, I didn't go back and take a look at what was the ultimate disposition of those remains. Technically, it was a data recovery, and so they had clearance to proceed in those areas. But we would have done everything in our capacity to keep them off of those deposits. So I don't know. That'd be a question for the county, and that's a good one.
Well, it looked like it was kind of off to the side of where things were being developed. So possible that it's still just open field out there.
Right, and a lot of space to work with. They didn't need it all, so right there by the road. Hopefully, they managed to block that area off and not do anything further with it. So maybe the rest of Block 1 is still out there intact. And there's some excellent research questions that could be addressed through further work at the site. One thing that I didn't get very far with that I wish I'd taken further was to kind of look at the site vertically and to try to slice apart the different features in the deposits. There's only 30 centimeters or so, and I did make an attempt at it, which I put into the manuscript, but it's not very clear. Couldn't get much out of trying to slice it vertically and also horizontally, and to see what we might get in terms of different occupations at different times. But I think that could be addressed with further investigations if there was ever a reason for that.
Was there any, did you guys look at, so that's away from the bluff where it drops down to Onion Creek.
Right.
Was there any kind of examination of the bluff area where there's that spectacular vista all the way out to Pilot Knob and beyond? Was there any investigation over in that area? Or
my recollection is that it was a rather steep area out there, and we looked over the whole time. I mean, we put in a lot of tests in a lot of places and roped off the places that had been previously disturbed. There was a house and historic occupation and so forth. So some places were kind of off limits. But nothing that I remember on the edge of the terrace or down the terrace.
Was there anything around the old cemetery?
I'm not familiar at the present time with where the cemetery is at. I'd have to look that up. Was that part of the earlier historic occupation?
there's a cemetery that's right on kind of there's a finger of the bluff that kind of sticks out and overlooks Onion Creek. And there was church when we were out there. There's court and church, and of course the cemetery and stuff. I was just wondering if there had been something associated with the bluff itself.
To my knowledge, no. You know, when you do these things, the county has a map, and they tell you to stay within area A and not to proceed to area B unless you have, like, you know, signed permission kind of thing. So within their design for the infrastructure is where we can find our work to, but I don't recall anything significant being found on the bluff.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that it's not out there.
Yeah.
I've got a question. And this may be directed more to Leslie than to you, James. The question relates to onions. Because you have both, as I understand it, bulbs and bulblets. The bulblets grow on little clusters above ground, and the bulbs are below ground. And I guess the question I have is, can you determine seasonality from the kinds of onions that one gets from archaeological sites? And, I guess that's directed to Leslie more than anyone else. Leslie?
What you're thinking of in terms of the little bulblets or bulbils, those are, as far as I know, at least in this region, they're specific to Allium canadensis, but we have other species of onions, Allium drummondii and a couple others in this area. I don't know how the researcher would have told the difference, and you probably can, between the little bulblets that are on top of, as you say, a kind of spring. They're doing this right now, a spring indicator of those little bulblets versus underground bulbs that are just really small, and those could be from some other species. They've had good, I believe it's actually a tuber and not a true bulb with scales and stuff. In California, with being able to tell seasonality by whether the corms have, they're corms, not tubers or bulbs. Corms have root attachments visible. You can tell seasonality from that. It doesn't sound like, and I wish we had weights, and thank you, Dr. Karbula, for putting up that chart. We don't have weights on those bulbs and bulb fragments. I would be really interested to know it, because if she's calling these bulbs, it does sound like that these, for archaeological specimens, are quite large, because I typically only see a single, like a scale, one single slender fragment of an onion. When you're slicing onions and you get just the one layer of an onion is typically what we see. So it does look like this site is pretty extraordinary. And she is saying lily family CF onion. So it's pot, and lily family contains a lot of the things that we would call bulbs. It is possible some of these are camas, but given that it's Onion Creek and the situation, I think onion's probably a really good ID. I hope that helps. I don't think it did. I'd be interested to know see what other aspects of seasonality can be inferred on the site, and how, and therefore how, to answer Dr. Karbula's bigger questions of how bulb processing can fit in. Is this consistent with a Toyah lifestyle, or are these some other people who are doing other things and just showing up in this area?
At the time, it was rather unique to have any suggestion of a Toyah assemblage, lithic assemblage, in association with pit oven features. And clearly an occupation over a couple hundred years that focused on pit oven features and the processing. At least one function was processing plant foods. So, and with the lithic assemblage being what it is, you know, it was unique, and bears some questions there. Chris, thanks for the question. It's good to see you, by the way. It's been a while. What strikes me is the number of bulbs that are found in and around the features. And I've had other sites, I've supervised other sites that have a few bulbs and scattered bulbs, but never quite so many in couple of blocks as these, there's charred onion bulbs are recovered prolifically in association with features and scattered about. And what I've been told again is that if you just have a few of them, that means you had a lot more during the occupation, and only the a few of them survive in the archaeological record. So it indicates a much larger use of the onion bulb, extensive use of the onion bulbs by the people there.
Yes, I'd agree. This is pretty impressive. I think the broader scale model now is in terms of kind of the worldwide use of earth oven features are often for cooking of these carbohydrate rich foods to turn the inulins and the other indigestible, less digestible carbohydrates into simpler sugars and that are more nutritionally available to people. That we're looking at a model across Texas where people are using earth oven features over broad swaths of space and time. I think the earliest onions in North America are still Mary Adair's at about 9,000 years ago from the Stiegenwald site in Kansas. And so desert rosettes in West Texas, breadroot and onion and camas in Central Texas. And then you're moving into East Texas, probably aquatic features, because even in the Great Lakes region, the Degan manuscript, which is LaSalle's nephew, I believe, around 1700, and he's talking about fully agricultural peoples there who are using great big earth ovens as winter facilities. They're sending these young women out into the cold lakes up to their waist to dive down and pick up nufar, spatterdock tubers, the rhizomes probably that they're cooking in these very large earth oven facilities. So it is a tradition that spans a lot of different types of lifestyles across space and time. So I wouldn't be surprised at anybody, anywhere, anytime making use of this kind of facility.
And in the case of feature 2, for instance, the large pit oven feature, probably reused, used and reused, and maybe reused again, the pit oven feature, and resulting in all those different breakout type piles. A moment ago, I mentioned the site I had upriver. Well, it has pit ovens and it has bulbs in context, a number of bulbs, charred bulbs in context, and dates to it was 7,800 to 8,200 BP. And then I recalibrated the dates in Oxcal and came up with 6,880 to 7,100 BC for the use of those. There was big pit feature with onion bulbs in it and other pit features around it and rake out piles. So the activity, the technology, the adaptation began long ago and has carried on through thousands and thousands of years. And here we are with a AD 1235 site, 2 sigma calibrated dates in 1235, doing the same types of things on Onion Creek through, that's how many thousands and thousands of years is that they're doing the same kinds of things. The differentiating factor here at the Toyah Bluff site is this Perdice assemblage and association with these earth ovens. And that's the part that's really, really different and fascinating.
Yes.
I think what strikes me is that a few days after rainstorms, onions throw up the white flowers. You can, they're all signaling, say, come and fetch me. And you have people going out and harvesting, going directly just to white flowers. You can amass basket loads of onions in a very short period of time during certain seasons. And particularly, in the spring rains that come through an area. And so, it looks to me like you've got something that was being done after a few days after rains, perhaps, and maybe a very seasonal activity reflected here. In the grand scheme of all the things that Toyah people are doing throughout the year, you've got something very special going on here that might be very localized and only happening a couple of days out of the year.
And the ephemeral drainage on one side of the terrace, kind of a narrow runoff type channel, is an important aspect of the site. And it resulted in alluvium. Not a lot, but it resulted in shallow alluvium. And when it flooded, I'll bet those types of flowers and onions and so forth were blooming right there on the terrace next to that drainage.
Yep. The piece of limonite, the yellow ochre that you were talking about, with the one that was incised, did you say that field had been plowed in the past? And is there any chance that that's plow damage?
Yielded, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Yielded what?
I was curious about whether the scratch marks on the ochre could be plow damage that's occurring to the site.
I suppose it was in context in the occupation, and we had a clear plow zone, and then we had a clear anthropogenic zone below that. We did have a couple of what we think now are intrusive later historic features, a couple of stakes, wooden stakes that were driven into nearby features, were driven in and had all the look of them as post holes, or we investigated these two wooden stakes as possible post holes next to features and stakes next to features, which were truncated. They were truncated at the top of the anthropogenic zone, and this was wood, and it's extended down. And we went round and round about how can you have wood preserved for, from 1200, 1300 AD, and is it really wood? And I think we came to the conclusion that those were intrusive from the plowing and the historic occupation. So I didn't put any of that into the presentation here. But it's possible that we might have had a plow that scarred that. I would think not, because of the in situ nature of all the finds. You saw how we came down in level 1, and then level 2, we pedestaled everything and mapped everything, and we got all that just mapped into the grid. So a lot of the ochre was in context. I don't remember where that particular piece came from, but a lot of it was in context, in feature context. So it would be kind of an odd thing for a plow to have scraped a piece and then we excavated it seemingly in context, but not impossible.
That one photo you showed, it actually looked like it was a square piece of ochre or rectangular. Had it been shaped?
It's kind of a block. It was
kind of
a thick block type piece with marks on one side. I don't know, Chris, I'd have to look up and see where that came from, where that specific piece came from. And, maybe it was near the upper portion of the deposits. Typically, they were buried in features and around features in level 3 and level 4, which would indicate to me that they were in context.
Well, James, I'm sorry, go ahead, Richard.
Well, I was going to say, in addition to the houses that were out there, it turns out there was a school out there also. And I'm going to have to go back and look at, I'm trying to visualize where, I thought you guys, the site was somewhere else than where it looks like it was, and the soccer fields and everything that's going on out there. But the school was kind of not too far off of Highway 71. And it looked like you guys were digging in that general area.
I'm going to try to bring up the map, which is a scary enough procedure here. Here we go. I don't know if that helps.
Well, north. Where's Highway 71 from there?
South of here. 71 is down here somewhere.
So the school was kind of north of 71, or yeah.
Here's
kind of north of 71.
Larger view.
The school is right in there. Yep. Go back. Go down a little further with your pointer. No, back on the other one there.
Let me.
Well, that's okay. It's close to that area.
Here.
Closer to 71. Yeah, down in that area. there was an old school, it's called Devotion. So it shows up on the county road maps. And there's a plantation out there that I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, Washington. It was pre-Civil War. His wife probably started the school, and then it continued on into Reconstruction. It went up to, the late 1900s, in a lot of newspaper articles and stuff, and then eventually got closed, and everything moved down to Garfield.
Yeah, the work was under TAC permit. So, any implications of the old historic schoolhouse being there and having any context or integrity left to it would have been investigated as part of the TAC permit up front. So,
yeah, I don't think they even knew I don't think the county knew about it.
Notice those are interesting comments. Notice the flat spot here on the terrace, and the rest of this is getting into hills up to the bluff, and then same with towards SA 71. So there's kind of this broad terrace area here,
right
next to the Thalweg. Here's Onion Creek on this side. That would have been ideal. Was ideal.
Well, the second cemetery, there was an old road that ran out to it, and judging from if your outline reflects the park, it was kind of at what is that? The east. There's a road that ran off of 71 to the east, and the cemetery is out in that area, and the school was like right on the boundary of the road that ran to the cemetery.
Okay.
So there's two cemeteries out there, right?
I don't want to ask a question, man.
I'm sure we avoided those with great alacrity.
Oh, James, I was wondering about were these people cooking the bison? Were they cooking them also in the pit oven features?
The bones were found in context around the features, and they were highly fragmented bones for the most part. A lot of unidentifiable stuff, and just a few pieces, 3 or 4 or 5 pieces that were identifiable as bison, and they were small pieces. So I think, yes, I think they were processed on site in small pieces, but their small pieces were brought in. There was no evidence of larger pieces or butchering at the site.
Yeah, you didn't find any heavy choppers, anything like that?
I would say no. They were sort of handheld devices, hand-sized, nothing overt that would indicate large-scale processing. There were a few unifaces, a few hide scrapers as part of the assemblage, and beveled knives. So it's possible that they had bison. There's bison on site. I conjecture small pieces brought in from outside, from other areas, and deer and other small mammals and unidentifiable mammals and so forth. There was not a lot of bone, but we had some medium, and we had large mammal, we had medium mammal, we had small mammal indicated, and different size classes.
Okay, well,
How about
if we have any other questions or comments?
Was
All
there
right,
any
sir.
indication of fish?
Indication of what, ma'am?
Fish.
Fish.
Fish. To my knowledge, no. I'd have to go back and review the assemblage to be sure about that, but I don't recall any fish bones or fish remains from my brief review of some of the literature.
Would fish bones things last? That is, if you came up 1,000 years later, would you be able to find anything like that?
I think you would from 1235 to 1435 AD from that context. And I think if there were fish bones, I think, hopefully we found them. I think they would preserve. The most intriguing aspect to me, one of the most, is I've never quite had my hands in such greasy, black, organic dirt as came from that site. It was clearly organic laden from the perched water table, and preservation was excellent in those deposits. I think fish remains would have been preserved. I think anything in there would have been preserved from a couple hundred years later for people to investigate. One of the best preserved sites I've come across, and noteworthy for that reason, and that's why you have so many onion bulbs also, is the onion bulbs in the deposits from the excellent preservation. And you can see it in the features. You can see the rock features, the discrete alignments, the different types of rocks. And it's a very well preserved piece of history.
Okay, everybody. I think that's about it. Dr. Karbula, we thank you very much. Very interesting information that you've given us tonight.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed giving the talk, and thanks for the invite. Like I said, I appreciate it and hope you enjoyed it, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. If there's nothing else, then we'll bid everybody good night.